Welcome to The Space Between, a podcast about seeking and finding alignment. I'm your host, Josh Scott, and I'm grateful that you've joined me for another conversation. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Space Between. I'm really excited about the conversation you're about to hear today. I'm here at our church in Morgantown with my dear friend, Kim Grant. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Josh. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks so much for coming up and for being a part of the podcast. So, Kim, could we just begin with you telling everybody a bit about who you are and what you're up to in the world?
Sure. I jokingly say that I'm beginning a third chapter, or what I call the third iteration of my life. I just turned 60. And life really is an adventure. So I've gone through two careers, and now I'm embarking on a third journey. So I'm just exploring options. I'm currently, my first career, I was an executive chef for 25 years. Did a lot of food ministry, hospitality ministry, those types of things. And then I became an LPGA golf pro just because that's how I roll. That's what I do.
Career trajectory.
Just absolutely. So, but all those two things were all based on the fact that whatever the medium, it's because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. So whether it's around a table, cooking food, or using the teaching of the game of golf to make a difference in people's lives. It was always about that interaction. And now I'm in the middle of doing an externship. I'm doing a unit of what is called clinical pastoral education as I pursue chaplaincy. And my placement with that is with an organization in Nashville called Open Table Nashville, which is an outreach to our friends experiencing homelessness. So I'm actually acting or working as a street chaplain, and we're out several days a week. And we have emergency supplies in our backpacks and just interacting with folks on the streets and building relationships and trust and trying to make a difference in their lives. So I'm a few months into this externship with Open Table, and I don't really know what the next step is. I want to pursue chaplaincy, but what I'm thinking is going to happen is combining my love of cooking and serving our most marginalized folks. And I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but that is what I light up about. That's what I'm passionate about, and that's really where my heart is. And so I'm pursuing opportunities and avenues. I graduate from my clinical pastoral education unit in May, and we'll see where life takes me after that. So here I am.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, a lot, right?
It's fantastic. And I would imagine the work you're doing has to be, in so many ways, emotionally taxing at times.
Yes. 2 weeks ago, I remember Sunday afternoon just being exhausted and waking up Monday morning and feeling really depleted. And I tried to examine what was happening there. And I have such a new appreciation for pastors, for chaplains, for those in full-time vocational ministry, because I found that in the weeks prior to my feeling depleted, the folks that we deal with are in such dire need. There's just tremendous need. And I wasn't used to being needed and having people always look to me for help, advice, to come alongside. So in that sense, it was depleting because I was giving. And it's really important, the whole self-care aspect, really important. And I've recently given myself permission. I come from an evangelical Christian tradition in my past, which I now view for me as what was a harmful theology. Mm-hmm. And so I've reframed that theology now. And I've finally given myself permission to pursue my interest in the contemplative tradition and Eastern mysticism a little, and kind of westernized Buddhism. And it's nothing really esoteric. It's no different than Jesus taking time away from the the huge crowds, the throngs, and taking time away to regroup and recenter. So mindfulness practice for me of late has been a wonderful tool in self-care to help me regroup and find my true self and find center and be ready to go out and be able to give to others.
I think it's so important. If you're going to be broken open and poured out for people, you have to have something poured into you. And, I remember growing up in that same evangelical culture, and I actually heard people say when the pastor would take a day off or would go play golf or whatever he might do is, well, the devil doesn't take a vacation. Yeah. To which eventually I was like, so this is the game plan we're going with, what the devil is doing, which is the whole problematic thing anyway.
Hey, listen, don't get me started about pastors on the golf course. Okay,
I'm sure you had some experiences.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, Kim, what we do in the space between is we talk about the journey toward alignment, and which you've shared your story here at our church before, some of it, and we've had conversations about what your journey has been like. And I just feel like it's important. It's an important story for people to hear because I think it has a lot to teach, especially pastors in a lot of ways. I think can learn a lot from what you had to say. So where do we need to begin to understand your journey?
Well, I refer to my life as the things that were done to me as a child and then the things that I did to myself as a result. I come from an abusive childhood. Both parents, my father, I will simply say I was in my father's bed from the age of 2 to 11. And then my mother was an alcoholic, and my whole life as a child, she would stick her finger in my face and say, "You're the reason my marriage is falling apart. You're the reason this family's falling apart." And as a young child, I never really understood that until I got to the point where I did understand it, because I was taking her place in their marriage and in their bed. So those experiences as a child, formed me, obviously. And then, so those were the things that were done to me. And then I did a lot of things to myself. I'm clean and sober 29 years.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. For me, I take full responsibility for my actions and my decisions. So there was a couple things happening. We were not church folk. So my only memories of church, really, I only went to church 2 times as a child, and all I can remember is the smell of strong coffee and graham crackers in fellowship hall afterwards. That's my framework for church as a child. But I did have a very heartfelt, sincere, what I would term a conversion experience, and wound up going with some school friends to an evangelical fundamentalist church in my junior high school years, all the way through high school. And the message that I was getting from that church caused what I call spiritual schizophrenia, because I knew that I was gay, and the message that I was getting from my church and that fundamentalism was, not only are you a sinner, but that's a particular type of hideous, disgusting sin. So
this was the idea of sexuality was something that was being talked about at church, or was it just sort of implicit?
It was implicit. Occasionally it might be mentioned, but it was implicit. And and this was many, many years ago. So this was, in the early 70s, so it wasn't spoken about. Occasionally there would be a very fire and brimstone sermon about sexual deviance. And so, again, I take full responsibility, but there was just this fracturing of the fact that I loved God, I loved Christ, and yet I knew I had this horrible, horrible secret. And the only way that the best that I could do at that time, coupled with dealing with, my childhood, was to turn to drugs and alcohol, and remained in that life of destruction for many, many years until, as they say, I hit my bottom, and I've been sober 29 years. So that was the journey. That's how when you asked about alignment and where do we begin, that's how it began. Again, the things that were done to me and then the things that I did to myself. And I'm grateful for a second chance of life. I've had a lot of people ask me recently, because of the work I do with our friends experiencing homelessness, there's addiction and alcoholism and mental illness. And people have asked me, how are you sober? How are you the woman that we know now? And back in the day, a wrong theology, that answer would have been there, but for the grace of God go I, which is an AA slogan. But I don't believe that. I don't want to believe in a God that would pick and choose like that. So God's grace falls on one and not the other. Yep. So now the only answer I can give is, and it's very trite, you and I talked about this another time, I chose not to drink or drug. And that's a very trite answer, but that's the truth. I just one day decided not to drink or drug. The healing that came long after that process, where I really began to examine why I used drugs and alcohol to injure myself, that healing began later. But that process of getting clean and sober, the only thing I can attribute that to is I believe with all my heart that we're the beloved children of God, and there's inherent worth and value in each one of us. And as I began to realize that there's a spark of the divine in me that kept me alive, that's the only thing I can attribute it to. Yeah.
So around what age did the abuse of alcohol and drugs begin for you?
I started sniffing glue when I was 12 years old. We'd go down to the little local store in town in the hobby section and buy tubes of glue. And I don't want to give too much information out, but I would sniff the glue, and it was a hallucinogenic, and that's how it started. I had a friend that was shooting heroin at that time. I didn't do that. But then, I was really adamant because I was an athlete. And I didn't want to interfere with my athletic prowess, but I didn't want to be like my mother.
Okay.
So all through college, I never did any drugs or alcohol. For my 18th birthday, I was offered a glass of sangria. I took one sip. I was like, thanks, no thanks. But as soon as I graduated college, literally within a month, I started smoking pot and got into barbiturates and pills and snorting what was called crank, crystal meth, and it just went from there. And then got heavily involved in the 80s in cocaine addiction and alcoholism.
So you mentioned your college experience. Mm-hmm. that when you shared that with me, like what that getting dropped off, like, is it okay? Would you share some of that?
Absolutely. I'm the youngest of four, and I knew at the age of 14, I remember standing in my house, and there had been an argument, I think, between some siblings and my mother and father. I can't remember the specifics, but I remember thinking, when I leave, when I get out of this hellhole, I am never coming back. So I had that resolute determination when I was 14 years old. 3 weeks before I was supposed to go away to school, I was accepted at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, nice Christian school. I was going to go out there. My parents announced that they had no money for my education, so I applied for late admission to, we were from New Jersey, Trenton State College at that time, and applied for late admission, got in. My father drove me to the campus, got out of the car, gave me a $20 bill and told me good luck. And that was the last time I ever took a penny from my parents or was ever under their roof. And it was an incredible struggle.
What was that? I mean, you just had to be like, oh my gosh, what am I going to?
No, I think I was so fiercely independent that, and the last few years living at home just hardened me in a way even more, and the resoluteness of wanting to get out and get away from them, and I look back now, I was a 17-year-old girl, and I wound up being homeless, not chronically, but for about a month. And the little guaranteed student loan that I had was not enough to pay for everything. So I was literally starving to death. I had enough money for a thing of bologna and a loaf of white bread, and I'd have one slice of bologna between two pieces of